My ex didn't even have the decency to hide her smugness. Out of nowhere, she texted, "Thanks for letting me live rent-free for 2 years. My new boyfriend loves the savings too." Like I was supposed to just laugh it off. I replied, "Glad I could help." Then I dug out an old folder, lease agreements, bank transfers, every receipt from the last 24 months. By the next morning, she had a backdated rent invoice in her inbox. 3 weeks later, I got the update. She wasn't bragging anymore. She was fighting an eviction notice. I've never been one to keep score in relationships. If I'm with someone, I don't count who paid for what or who owes who. That's probably why, when my ex moved in with me 2 years ago, I didn't even think about charging her rent. She had just gotten out of a messy breakup, was juggling part-time work, and swore she just needed a couple of months to get back on her feet. I had the space, I had the stability, and honestly, I cared about her. It felt like the right thing to do. Those couple of months turned into 6. 6 turned into 12. And before I knew it, we were 2 years in. She still wasn't paying rent, and I was covering groceries, utilities, even her phone bill, just until she could catch up. Friends would hint that maybe I was being taken advantage of, but I brushed it off. We had good moments. We laughed. We traveled. I thought the investment, both financial and emotional, was worth it. And then, almost without warning, she started pulling away, texting less when she was out, coming home later and later with vague explanations. The girls' nights became more frequent, but her stories about them less believable. I confronted her a couple of times, but she'd flip it back on me, accusing me of being controlling or insecure. Eventually, I stopped asking. If she was unhappy, I figured she'd just leave. Turns out, she was already halfway gone. One Friday afternoon, she sent a short text. "I think it's best if we go our separate ways. I'll come get my stuff next week." No conversation. No in-person talk. Just like that, 2 years of my life were reduced to a few lines on a screen. I didn't reply right away. I spent the weekend boxing up her things, and by Monday, they were stacked neatly by the door. When she came to collect them, she was all smiles, like we were just two friends parting ways on good terms. I let her leave without a fight. I didn't block her. I didn't even delete her number. Weeks passed. I assumed that was the end of it. Then, out of the blue, I got that text. "Thanks for letting me live rent-free for 2 years. My new boyfriend loves the savings too." It wasn't just smug, it was gloating. Like all the time, money, and patience I'd given her was some kind of joke. That was the moment something in me shifted. I wasn't angry in a loud, shouting way. It was a cold, focused kind of anger, the kind that doesn't explode. It calculates. And by the time I typed back, "Glad I could help," I already knew exactly how I was going to make sure she'd regret sending that message. I didn't answer her text again after that. No snark, no insult, no good luck. Just silence. If she thought that meant she'd gotten the last word, she was about to find out how wrong she was. I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick, dusty envelope labeled Lease, 2019. Inside were copies of every rental agreement since I bought my condo. I've always kept meticulous records, part habit, part paranoia. It was all there. The original lease in my name, proof of the mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery receipts. But the real gold was buried in a separate folder, the one marked miscellaneous, roommate agreements. Back when she first moved in, I'd printed a roommate contract template from the internet as a joke. We'd filled it out over wine, laughed about how official it looked, and signed it. It was meant to be lighthearted, more of a fun couple thing than a real document. But here's the thing, it had her signature. And it had a clause, one she'd agreed to, stating that rent would be $1,200 per month, payable either in cash or by contribution to household expenses. No, she'd never actually paid it. But the paper existed. Dated. Signed. That meant I could itemize every unpaid month like a running tab. 24 months at $1,200 a month? That's $28,800 before even touching utilities or shared costs. I spent the rest of the night going through bank statements, highlighting every grocery trip I'd covered, every utility bill in my name. By the time I was done, the total was north of $34,000. The next morning, I drafted an invoice. It was clean, professional, no emotional language, just numbers and dates. I attached the roommate agreement as page 2, followed by itemized expenses. The cover letter was short. Per our signed agreement dated January 15th, 2020. This is a record of unpaid rent and expenses accrued during your stay at my property. Payment is due within 30 days. I printed it, scanned it into a PDF, and emailed it to her. Subject line, outstanding balance. Immediate attention required. No explanation. No emoji. No postscript. 5 hours later, my phone lit up with her name. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that started friendly. Hey, I think you sent this by mistake. But by the end, she was swearing at me. I still didn't call back. Instead, I sent a single follow-up email. All correspondence on this matter should be in writing. And that's when I knew I had her rattled. Because people like her, they don't handle paper trails well. And I just created one she couldn't laugh off in a text to her new boyfriend. 2 days passed before she tried again. This time, it wasn't a call, it was a text. We never had a real agreement. That paper was a joke. You can't just make this stuff up. I stared at the screen, almost amused. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people only call something a joke when it stops working in their favor. I replied within minutes. The agreement has both our signatures and a date. Itemized expenses are documented. If you have questions, please reply in writing with specific points of dispute. Professional. Cold. No emotional hooks for her to grab onto. She didn't answer for the rest of the day. That night, though, I got a Facebook notification. She made a post about toxic exes who think they can bill you for breathing their air. It got a couple dozen laughing emojis from her friends. I didn't comment. I didn't even screenshot it. Instead, I forwarded her my original invoice again. Same subject line. Same PDF attached. 2 mornings later, I got a different kind of message. Okay, maybe we should just meet and talk about this like adults. I don't think you understand how bad this could make me look. Oh, there it was, the first crack in her confidence. I wrote back. I understand perfectly. That's why I'm giving you the opportunity to resolve this privately before I take the next step. She called immediately. I ignored it. 5 minutes later, another text. What next step? I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled up my county's small claims court website. It took me less than 20 minutes to start a draft of the complaint. Names, dates, amount owed, copies of the contract, and receipts, all neatly attached. And then I waited. It's funny, silence can be louder than any threat. By day 4, her posts on social media had stopped. By day 5, mutual friends started texting me with vague messages like, hey, did something happen with you too? She's acting weird. On day 6, she finally broke. Look, can we please just forget about this? I'll send you a little something for the trouble, but I can't pay all that. I told her the number wasn't negotiable. 30 days. Payment in full. She tried one last jab. Good luck explaining this to everyone when they find out what kind of person you are. I didn't bother replying, because by then, I had already decided exactly who I was going to explain it to next, and it was someone who had far more power over her life than her Facebook audience. Her threat about explaining to everyone didn't bother me. If anything, it confirmed what I suspected. She was more afraid of public perception than of owing me 34 grand. That gave me an angle. See, my ex has always cared more about status than substance. Her job wasn't glamorous, but she built this little image for herself. The reliable employee, the team player, who could be trusted with important clients. And I happened to know that her employer had a very strict policy about employee conduct and financial disputes. How did I know? Because a friend of mine worked in the same HR department. We'd met for coffee a few weeks earlier, before any of this started, and she'd mentioned how the company handled situations where an employee's personal behavior could affect the brand. It wasn't a gossip session, just an interesting tangent at the time. But now, it was the missing puzzle piece. I drafted an email. It wasn't vindictive. It was factual, supported by documents, and worded in a way that made it impossible to dismiss as drama. Dear HR manager, I am contacting you regarding an ongoing financial dispute with one of your employees, her full name. Per the attached signed agreement, she resided in my property for 2 years without paying agreed-upon rent or utilities, totaling $34,000. While I am pursuing this matter through legal channels, I believe you should be aware of the situation as it may pertain to your company's code of conduct and conflict of interest policies. Please let me know if you require additional documentation. I attached the signed roommate agreement, the itemized invoice, and a PDF of her own text bragging about living rent-free and using the money for her new boyfriend. I hit send. I didn't expect a reply right away, but I got one the next morning. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We take these matters seriously and will follow up as appropriate. That was all I needed. Within a week, I started hearing from mutual acquaintances that she'd been put on leave while an internal review was conducted. Her tone and texts changed from hostile to pleading. You didn't have to involve my job. This is my livelihood. I didn't answer. A few days later, another message came through. Please, I'll find a way to pay you. Just tell them it's all a misunderstanding. But here's the thing. I hadn't told them anything that wasn't 100% true. There was no misunderstanding. Just her words, her signature, and her debts. And now, she was learning a lesson she'd never forget. When you treat someone's generosity like a free buffet, you don't get to complain about the bill, especially when it's delivered in front of your boss. By the end of that week, the cracks were turning into full-on collapses. She'd gone from smug Facebook posts to radio silence online, which in her world was the equivalent of waving a white flag. When someone thrives on attention, disappearing is never voluntary. It's damage control. The first real sign came from a mutual friend, Lisa. She sent me a screenshot of a private group chat where my ex was venting. HR's breathing down my neck. They're saying I might have to disclose everything if this goes legal. Does anyone know a lawyer who works for free? The responses were a mix of fake sympathy and thinly veiled judgment. One girl even asked if this was about that invoice thing she'd been laughing about last week. My ex didn't reply. Then the logistical fallout started. Her landlord, not me, the new guy she'd moved in with, got a letter from the county court. Since she wasn't the leaseholder, she had no legal right to be there if she was named in any pending claims. It didn't mean immediate eviction, but it meant the owner knew her name was attached to a legal mess. 2 days later, her car, the same one she'd bragged about owning outright, disappeared from her usual parking spot. Repo truck, according to Lisa. Apparently, she'd been a few months behind on payments. The beauty of it? I hadn't touched any of that. Her life was just unraveling under the weight of her own poor decisions. My only role was shining a very bright light on the mess so she couldn't pretend it wasn't there. And then came the kicker. Her new boyfriend posted a cryptic status. Some people just use you until they run out of options. Lesson learned. It got a suspicious number of likes from women I didn't recognize. By the time she texted me again, the desperation was palpable. Okay, I'll pay you half now and the rest over the next year. Please, I can't lose everything over this. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Payment in full. 30 days. No bargaining. No sympathy. Her reply came fast and sloppy. You don't understand what you're doing to me. But that was the thing. I understood perfectly. I just didn't care anymore. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about balance. She'd treated my home like a free hotel, my money like an endless ATM, and my kindness like a weakness to exploit. Now she was finally paying the tab. And the 30-day clock? It was still ticking. The shift was almost predictable. When begging didn't work, she tried to flip the script. Her next text wasn't desperate. It was combative. You're harassing me. If you keep this up, I'll get a restraining order. I actually laughed. Because if she thought that would scare me, she clearly hadn't thought this through. A restraining order requires evidence of harassment, not legally pursuing a debt with signed contracts and receipts. And thanks to my meticulous record keeping, every interaction between us since the invoice had been in writing. No calls, no unannounced visits, no threats. Just emails, texts, and formal documents. I replied with a short, clinical message. As noted previously, all communication is related to the repayment of a documented debt. Please direct any legal concerns to your attorney. Then I blind copied my lawyer on the email. Not because I needed immediate representation, but because it sent a subtle signal. This is already bigger than you think. The next day, I filed the official small claims complaint. Court date set. Her name publicly listed in the docket. Copies of the filing went to her last known address, her email, and, per procedure, her employer's HR department. That's when she made her last real move. An email, subject line, final warning. Inside, she accused me of defamation, of trying to destroy her reputation, and claimed she'd sue me for damages if I didn't withdraw the claim. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I attached her own text from weeks ago, the one where she bragged about living rent-free for 2 years and how her new boyfriend loved the savings. Below it, I wrote, Factual statements with documented evidence are not defamation. This will be my final correspondence outside of court. I sent it, then closed the email thread for good. From there, the silence was almost unnerving. No more threats. No more bargaining. Just nothing. Until the court clerk emailed me the pre-hearing notes. Apparently, she'd shown up for the initial review without an attorney, without evidence, and without even a coherent defense. Her entire argument boiled down to, it was a relationship, not a rental agreement. Unfortunately for her, the signed lease with itemized monthly costs didn't care about her interpretation, and neither did the judge. The pre-hearing ended with a formal notice. Unless she settled in full before the court date, a judgment would be entered against her. That judgment would be enforceable through wage garnishment, meaning her employer would be legally required to take the money from her paycheck, which meant she was about to have the one thing she'd fought hardest to protect, her image at work, dragged into the light, whether I lifted another finger or not. By the time the court date was 2 weeks away, the balance of power wasn't just tilted, it was completely inverted. She'd gone from cocky texts and thinly veiled insults to ghosting most of her own social circle. Even the mutual friends who used to defend her had gone quiet. Nobody wants to back someone whose life is now a walking cautionary tale. I wasn't just prepared for court, I was over-prepared. 2 binders sat on my desk, each with labeled tabs, lease agreements, payment history, text screenshots, copies of certified letters, and even timestamps from when she'd read my messages and chosen not to respond. If she tried to argue miscommunication, I could prove otherwise in seconds. But I wasn't just going to win. I wanted the win to be seen. That's when I decided on one last, very public step. A week before the hearing, I mailed her a notice of intent to garnish wages. Not through a lawyer, not from the court, but directly from me. It was 100% legal to send, and it wasn't a bluff. If the judgment went through, wage garnishment was the obvious next step. But here's the thing, I didn't send it to her home address. I sent it to her workplace. Marked confidential, sure, but envelopes have a way of being noticed when they come from someone other than a client or a supplier. 2 days later, my HR friend texted me. Your envelope showed up. She was pale as a ghost walking out of the mailroom. Exactly as planned. I didn't need to humiliate her in the courtroom. She was already doing that to herself in the court of public opinion. All I had to do was make sure the people whose approval she valued most knew she was in trouble, and that trouble was of her own making. The Friday before the hearing, she finally broke the silence. If I pay in full before court, will you withdraw everything? I can get the money. I stared at that message for a long time. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't even an apology. It was pure self-preservation. I replied, payment in full must be received and cleared by bank transfer before the court date. Only then will I consider withdrawal. Her answer was one word, fine. That was when I knew. Even if she sent the money, the victory was already mine. Because the real win wasn't the 34 grand. It was watching the same person who once bragged about using me now scramble to buy back her reputation and knowing she'd never get it fully back. The morning of the hearing, I woke up early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be there before her. There's a certain quiet satisfaction in sitting at the petitioner's table, organized and calm, while the other side walks in late and flustered. The courtroom was small, just a handful of benches and the judge's bench elevated at the front. I'd been here before for unrelated matters, so I knew the rhythm. The clerk calls the case, both sides stand, and it all starts feeling very real, very fast. She walked in with a man I didn't recognize, not a lawyer, just some guy in a cheap suit who looked more uncomfortable than she did. My guess? A friend of a friend trying to help. The kind of help that lasts exactly until the first legal term flies over your head. The judge entered, and after the formalities, we got right to it. I handed over my binder. Every page numbered, every piece of evidence cross-referenced in a summary sheet on top. When it was her turn, she shuffled through a few loose papers, mostly bank statements and vague handwritten notes. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. The judge looked at her over his glasses. Do you dispute that you lived at the petitioner's residence for the period stated? She hesitated, glanced at her helper, then said, well, yes, but it was a relationship, not a rental. The judge cut her off. The lease agreement is signed by you. It clearly states monthly rent, due dates, and terms. This is not ambiguous. From there, it was like watching a slow-motion collapse. Every excuse she tried. I thought he was covering it. We never discussed payment after we broke up. It's not fair. Was met with the same calm, surgical response from me, backed up by documentation. When the judge finally spoke again, it was with a finality that hung in the air. Judgment in favor of the petitioner for the full amount of $34,275, plus court costs and interest. Payment is due immediately. If unpaid, petitioner is entitled to seek wage garnishment. She froze. Her helper muttered something under his breath. I simply nodded, thanked the judge, and started packing my binder. As I walked past her on the way out, she didn't look up. Her hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, exactly, more finished. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. And closure, it turns out, looks a lot like walking away from a courthouse with a signed judgment in your favor while the person who tried to use you realizes the game's over. 2 weeks after the judgment, the paperwork for wage garnishment was filed. She'd made no attempt to pay voluntarily, which meant the court's next move was automatic. Her employer would be notified, and the payments would come directly from her paycheck. I didn't have to lift a finger. The notice went out on a Monday. By Wednesday, I got a message from that same HR friend at her office. She's been in and out of meetings all morning. Looks like the news hit hard. I could imagine the scene. Her boss, her HR rep, and that manila envelope on the table. Not a conversation you walk away from with your head high. A week later, I got an email from the court confirming the garnishment order had been processed. The first payment would hit my account within 30 days. Interest included. I thought that would be the end of it. But trouble has a way of snowballing when you've spent years building your life on ego and borrowed goodwill. By month's end, I heard she'd been let go from her job. Official reason? Downsizing. Unofficial? She was a PR liability, the kind of drama no company wants hanging over its brand. Losing the job didn't stop the garnishment, it just slowed it down. Now, every new employer she found would get the same order within weeks of her hire. It was a shadow she couldn't outrun. She tried one last reach out, a handwritten letter. No apology, no taking responsibility. Just an emotional appeal about how this isn't who I am, and we both made mistakes. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. She'd written her own, ending the day she decided I was an easy mark. Months passed. The payments trickled in. Each one was a small reminder, not of the money lost, but of the principle restored. Every dollar was proof that I hadn't just swallowed the insult. And here's the part one didn't expect. I didn't feel triumphant anymore. Not like in the courtroom, not like when she first saw that invoice. I just felt done. Like I'd closed a chapter that should have ended a long time ago. People ask sometimes if I'd do it again, if I'd push it all the way to the legal finish line knowing the hassle, the time, the paperwork. The answer's yes. Not for the revenge, not even for the money, but because letting someone walk over you once makes it 10 times easier for the next person to try. And I don't hand out second chances to people who show me exactly who they are the first time. It's been almost a year since that judgment. The balance is nearly paid off, a steady drip of deposits from the court into my account, each marked garnishment disbursement. By now, the numbers are just background noise. What hasn't faded is the lesson. People like her don't wake up one morning and decide to take advantage. It's a pattern, small tests to see what they can get away with. Ignore one, excuse another, and suddenly you're years deep, footing the bill for someone who sees you as a walking ATM with a heartbeat. When I think back to that text, thanks for letting me live rent-free for 2 years. My new boyfriend loves the savings too. I realize it wasn't even the content that got me. It was the smugness. The certainty that I wouldn't push back. That I'd just swallow it like every other favor, every other expense, every other moment I told myself, it's not worth the fight. This time, it was worth the fight. And here's the part they never tell you about holding people accountable. It's not loud. It's not some cinematic mic drop where the credits roll and you walk away into the sunset. It's paperwork. It's patience. It's knowing the other person is stuck in a slow grind of consequences they can't spin their way out of. Friends who used to roll their eyes when I mention her now ask for updates. Not because they care about the money, but because there's something deeply satisfying about seeing someone's arrogance meet a brick wall of reality. I don't celebrate the payments anymore. I don't frame it as revenge. It's just maintenance. like mowing the lawn or paying a utility bill. A routine reminder that I closed a door and locked it for good. If she ever thought I'd feel guilty, she miscalculated. I sleep just fine. Because the day you stop defending yourself is the day you invite every opportunist in your orbit to take a shot. So if you've been sitting there, swallowing 100 little insults, convincing yourself you're taking the high road, ask yourself this. Are you really being noble, or are you just avoiding the work of drawing a line? I drew mine in court, and I made sure it was permanent.